This video is sponsored by War Thunder. How capable is the world's fastest graphics card, the RTX 5090, at running games at 8K? I'll be testing all sorts, ranging from very demanding ones all the way down to War Thunder. But I'll start with the newest game, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. This is how it runs at 8K on the highest experimental preset, with no DLSS or FSR upscaling, and I got around 30-ish FPS, and is consuming about 550 watts of power to achieve this. I can boost the frame rate by a few more by disabling anti-aliasing entirely. I know some people argue you don't need anti-aliasing at such a high resolution, but to me, if you've gone to such lengths to play the game at 8K, the last thing you want is distracting high contrast pixels shimmering to remind you that you're still looking at pixels, so I'd still want at least SMAA on, if not something more robust. High contrast pixels are still very noticeable at 4K, I'm sure there will be circumstances at 8K where they will be as well. I've also seen a lot of people claiming this game is well optimised, and this is another thing where I'm in two halves about. It's no surprise this game runs well since it's very similar to the first game, which was released 7 years ago using the same game engine and stuff, so a lot of this game's optimization just comes from how hardware has improved since 2018. But I also think a lot of this is people's resentment towards the performance impact of ray tracing. As this game doesn't have that, people are flocking around this game as an example of how games should be, though funnily enough, being a dynamic day-night open world game with lots of sheltered outdoor areas and pools of water everywhere, I'd argue it's one of the games that would benefit most from ray-traced effects. Though I can't deny, this game runs very well, and its countryside looks lush. I would rather explore a grassy glade in this game than I would in most games, but preferably not at 30 FPS, so I dropped to low preset, and it returned a smooth and playable 50 to 60 FPS, which is absolutely fine for this kind of gameplay. However, the shadows were distractingly low quality and flickery, as you can see just here, and this isn't what you want when you've gone to great lengths to play this game at 8K. And riding through the world, the pop-in was god awful, and was only made worse by the ultra high-res clarity in which these atrocities appeared. If only there was a way to get the best of both worlds, and this is where I enabled DLSS upscaling. In a video about 8K, does upscaling to 8K count? Well, I recently made this video, which you can see in the top right corner right now, and I suggest you check this out because it explains my reasoning, so as not to bog this video down with too many specifics. But you'll soon discover why I like upscaling, and it's because enabling DLSS performance mode in this game did indeed allow the best of both worlds, allowing me to run the game pop-up free at the highest experimental graphics preset, at 8K, at well over 70 FPS, and with visual clarity that surpassed 8K natively. It was glorious. Curiously, FSR performance upscaling didn't run quite so well, suggesting that either this upscaler comes with more of a performance overhead at super high resolutions, or just that the RTX 5090 is super optimized for DLSS's AI-based upscaling. I was getting around 60 FPS with FSR on, compared with 80 with DLSS, though both are a lot better than the 30ish I was getting without upscaling of any sort. I next tested this video's sponsor, War Thunder. I have already tested this game at 9:16 aspect ratio, which almost reaches 8K's vertical resolution. But now it's the real deal. I figured that War Thunder would be optimised for lower spec machines, so it's no surprise it ran at over 100 FPS, maxed out on the highest quality movie graphics preset, at 8K. So while in a lot of games I might have to enable DLSS at 8K to get playable performance, here it just felt like, why not use DLSS to make more efficient use of the graphics card's resources, either to extract more image quality or more performance. So I played a match with DLSS quality mode enabled, and I was well in excess of 150 FPS average at all times. I recommend restarting the game between resolution changes though, because doing this mid-match did result in weird ambient occlusion issues, and at one point I got a white square on the screen which then became a full screen white flashbang. It went away after a couple of seconds, but not before I sustained a shell to the face. And last I returned back to native 8K, hopping into another match using full-blown DLAA. This uses the same trickery as DLSS, but at native 8K resolution, so it's merely using the DLSS technologies to enhance the image quality more, but it is still operating at full-blown 8K. This is more the sort of mode you might want to use at lower resolutions like 1080p, where getting every pixel to look as good as possible is more of a priority. But in this game I was still getting good performance with it enabled at 8K. 8K with DLAA is the golden standard for visual quality. I reckon in 20 years time, if we do still have conventional resolutions, 8K with DLAA will still be deemed the golden standard. It's that robust. And in this proper match, it averaged about 90 FPS. Nice and smooth, no stutters or problems. War Thunder is already very much a native 8K capable game. You don't even need a 5090 to achieve this. There are actually a few videos online dating back years of people playing this game at 8K on cards like the RTX 2080 Ti, so it's no wonder that I can handle it so well. There are also people seemingly confused about 8K textures. This is nothing to do with the game's resolution, it's merely the size of the textures used within the game. Sort of like how you can view a photo on your phone and then zoom in to see more details. Obviously, the higher the resolution of your phone screen, the more detail you can see without having to zoom in, and the higher the resolution of the photo, the more you can zoom in before reaching the limits. War Thunder has a cool blog post explaining how they upgraded their textures to 8K, stating that most of them were already made to that quality but just not included in the game at such a high resolution beforehand, which I guess cuts down on the download size. However, for the aircraft in this game, they used AI upscaling to bring them up to 8K, even pointing out that it turned some of the text into Tolkien-style inscriptions, which they'll be manually adjusting later on. A lot of these textures needed overhauling because this game features over 2,500 tanks, planes, ships and helicopters spanning 100 years of battle history right up to the present day. It is the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made, featuring incredibly detailed vehicles and graphics. With 8K textures and accurate sound effects, it will help bring the reality of warfare to your screen, no matter what your screen's resolution is. Accurate damage simulations will highlight the destruction that every landed shot you make wreaks upon your foes. Destroy fuel tanks, burn off munitions, shred the crew with flak, and have the X-ray system show you exactly what's going down inside. If you want simplified, fast-paced action, then arcade mode will be for you. Simulator mode is the game's most realistic depiction of combat. Alternatively, you can have a blend of the two with the realistic mode. Choose one of the most powerful war machines of all time, customize them to your heart's content, and join the 70 million players already engaging in PvP battles today, all over the world. It's free to download and to play on PC, consoles, and even mobile devices, making this the game for fans of combat history. Links in this video's description, and if you haven't played in the last 6 months, then you'll receive a massive bonus pack, including multiple premium vehicles and 100,000 silver lions. Now to finally get on to more demanding games like the Talos Principle 2. Once its textures eventually load in. Seems like even the RTX 5090 struggles to run this game maxed out at 8K. Not a huge surprise, because unlike Kingdom Come or War Thunder, this game does have ray-traced effects, built into the higher graphics presets of this Unreal 5 engine game. All maxed out with temporal anti-aliasing, I got about 28 FPS average, but it would vary somewhere between 25 and 35. Remember, the GeForce 4090 was getting about 20 FPS under the same conditions, so the 5090 is a big step up from that at least, but still not enough. It felt juddery and unresponsive, and I wouldn't want to play the game like this. But rather than jump straight to upscaling, what if I stick to native 8K but enable frame generation instead? Oh no, this did not work well at sub 30 FPS. The look of the game got smoother, but my goodness, it felt severely delayed. And not just by the usual, ooh, there's a frame delay kind of lag either. This was severe, so much so that I had to film myself doing these inputs to show you just how bad it was. I had reflex on, yet this lag was still so great, it was as though the game was being controlled by another mouse somewhere, controlled by somebody else, watching what I was doing with my mouse and attempting to mimic it a significant fraction of a second later. So much so that even keyboard inputs felt delayed. It was horrible. So let's not use frame gen in this game at 25 FPS. Dropping from ultra down to high preset, the average went up to between 35 and 40 FPS, but it still didn't feel worth the sacrifice. So for now, if you want 8K Talos Principle 2, then tough, you're going to need upscaling to reach it. And I got approximately 60 FPS with either Ultra preset at DLSS performance or High preset with DLSS quality. Neither's quite high enough to run without compromise, as the frame rate in this game does seem to vary quite a bit depending on where you're looking. And the other upscalers weren't any better. FSR ran at about the same speed, while XS and Unreal's own upscaler actually ran a little bit slower. Oh, Unreal 5 engine, caught in an awkward transition period between raster and ray traced, out at a time of hardware price performance stagnation and even regression. You have, rightly or wrongly, gained a reputation for being unoptimized. Will you go down in the history books as being a bad game engine? Or are you tomorrow's CryEngine? That was an engine once with a reputation for slowing everything down, but now up against next generation engines, is being praised for making the likes of Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 look so good whilst running so well, thanks to all its clever little shortcuts that have very little overhead compared with real-time solutions. Well, it could be worse, and to demonstrate this, here's Star Wars Jedi Survivor, a game based on the Unreal 4 engine, which manages to be even less optimised than Unreal 5 is. I hoped since testing this game last year on the RTX 4090 at 8K, that it had somehow all been fixed. But that seems like wishful thinking, as this game is still horribly broken, with the bottom half of the screen all corrupted and weird looking, the menus too small. It's sad. Despite this being one of the newest games I have, it's still one of the least prepared for 8K gaming. The textures did at least load in properly this time. With the RTX 4090 it struggled, so maybe this is one benefit of the extra 8GB of VRAM that the 5090 has. But I still don't trust the frame rate shown here, as changing the upscaling, ray tracing or frame gen settings didn't seem to do anything. It still hovered slightly below 30 FPS, similar to how the 4090 had done. So this testing, in my opinion, is invalid, and I think I'm just going to have to write this game off for future 8K testing. With Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Circle of Doom, I had a revelation. You're watching this video to see the RTX 5090 fail, aren't you? So here it is. Here's how it handles this game maxed out at 8K. At a cinematic 6 FPS, completely unplayable, in weird slow motion, and it drops further to 4 FPS once combat begins. Evidently, we'll need a 6090, 7090, 8090 or 9090 to stand a chance here. Curiously, it seems to be VRAM limited. It's actually consuming significantly less power than normal. You heard it here first, 32GB of VRAM isn't enough in 2025. Luckily, DLSS Upscaling changed everything. DLSS performance ran at 50 FPS, a little low for my liking but infinitely better than native was, and Ultra performance upped it to 70 plus FPS average. This is using a base resolution of just 1440p, but it's definitely how you'd want to play this game on an 8K screen. Ready or Not was a game that the RTX 4090 simply couldn't handle at 8K, resulting in about 20 FPS and in regular crashes, so I didn't even bother testing it properly. Yet it works okay with the 5090, and I think it's the VRAM. This game requires about 27GB of the stuff at 8K. Don't get too excited though, because you still won't want to play the game like this. Now in the lobby area, it doubled the frame rate to about 40 FPS. Amazing! But during actual gameplay, this dropped to a very laggy feeling 30 FPS. I couldn't shoot straight, I couldn't aim properly, and I couldn't save the hostages. So just like how I play the game normally. But it still worked, and the crashes were gone, so I guess that's progress. Enabling DLSS quality boosted the average frame rate to north of 60 FPS in this game, so provided you don't mind a waff of thin sliver of upscaling in this game, it's doable. Hitman 3 is one of the less demanding ray-traced games, and I tried 3 different ways of playing it depending on what you want. If you want 8K native ray-traced, then sorry, you're looking at 20 FPS. Still up from 15 on the 4090, so not the biggest improvement, although it does equate to about 33%, so actually not too bad. Also, who knew Hitman had such destructible environments? Makes me want to shoot it all up now, but not at this frame rate. So the second way I played was native 8K without ray tracing, which ran at a very playable 75 FPS, well up from the 4090's 45-ish FPS. Percentage-wise, that's, I can't do it in my head, but it's a leap from playable performance to very playable performance. The last way I played was 8K ray tracing, but using DLSS performance upscaling. So really it's just a 4K resolution, and it hit 60 FPS average almost exactly. If you want 8K, no compromises to the settings like ray tracing, then using DLSS like this is the logical compromise to make. I mean, it's barely even a compromise, is it? Still looks great. Assassin's Creed Valhalla. I know this isn't the latest game in the series, but I tested this one with the 4090, and I was getting about 35 FPS at ultra settings with that graphics card. Well, the 5090 surpasses 50, a really decent gain again here, making it more playable on ultra than the 4090 was on medium. If it wasn't for these lines running down the grassy areas, I'd say this was ideal. I don't want to dwell too long on this game since it isn't even the most recent game in the series, and it doesn't even have DLSS, so any compromises I make at 8K have to be to the graphics presets, and that feels like a bad compromise to have to make. So, onto a game that does have DLSS, Assassin's Creed Mirage. What a sneaky game, not just because you're an assassin, but also because it secretly murders your settings by slipping resolution scaling on and all that. But don't worry, I was making sure I was getting proper full 8K resolution here. In my mind, this is an inferior game to Valhalla because it's less graphically demanding, yet it looks better, so win-win. And the RTX 5090 very nearly hit 60 FPS, maxed out in this game at 8K. So close, yet not quite. This won't do. So I enabled DLSS quality just to guarantee I got over the 60 FPS mark, and was quite underwhelmed when it only averaged 75. I was expecting more like 100 or something like that. but at least it is more than 60. Maybe it had slyly snuck on resolution scaling of some sort. Anyway, Mirage is a game that can be maxed out at 8K. And yet, it's very scalable because on the other end of the spectrum, it can run pretty well on low-powered devices such as the Steam Deck, but probably not at 8K. CS2, the game that everybody wants to play in 8K, probably at a cinematic 24 FPS or something. I jest. The RTX 4090 could already max this game out at about 100 FPS average, but recording the screen came with erratic frame rate dips for some reason. Well, the 5090 manages CS2 a bit better in every way, but still not perfectly in any. It does average more around 120, give or take 20, making it dangerously close to achieving the standard 144Hz gaming monitor standard at 8K. Unfortunately, recording the screen still caused inconsistent frame pacing, which wasn't a problem when I wasn't recording, but it was still a lot better than the judder I was getting with the 4090. I don't know what my problem is. First of all, I alienate everybody who cares about graphics by saying I don't mind the Unreal 5 engine, and now I'm going to upset every competitive player by saying this game seems quite well optimised, which is blasphemy as far as this game's player base is concerned. When CSGO jumped from Source 1 to Source 2, it stole their frame rates and they're not happy with it. But this game does look better now. Death Stranding was a game I felt even the GeForce 3080 could do at 8K, provided you used DLSS Upscaling. But the 4090 came this close to achieving 60 FPS in this game without upscaling of any sort, and the 5090 now blows right past that and averages about 80 FPS. Native 8K, no upscaling at all. Perfect. Or is it? I actually pointed this out in the 4090 video. Even at 8K, this game comes with noticeable ghosting, presumably because it uses temporal anti-aliasing by default. In that video, I ended it on a bit of a cliffhanger. I wonder if upscaling could fix this problem. Actually, I don't want that because I know the answer already. Never got around to answering it, so I'll answer it now. Yes, DLSS can fix this ghosting. Here's some 50% speed, zoomed in footage showing DLSS quality at the top, 8K with no anti-aliasing in the middle, and 8K temporal anti-aliasing at the bottom. I really don't know what's going on with this game. It seems the amount of red on the grass changes every time I load it up. But crucially, temporal anti-aliasing in this game sucks ass. Native is sharp but shimmery, while DLSS is DLSS, and it runs significantly faster than the other two as well. But I'll end this game's showcase with some native 8K footage with temporal anti-aliasing of me trying to get Sam to fall over. It was actually adorable. Fluffykins was sat on my lap taking a real interest in Sam Porter Bridges, stumbling over the environment, and I wanted to see if she would react to him getting hurt. She didn't. But Christ, look at the ghosting in this spot here. Doesn't look this bad in practice, but still, this is one of those instances where having DLSS upscaling would actually improve the visual quality massively. Going back to older games than this, I feel like a bit of a broken record, as I already benchmarked all these games in my original review of the RTX 5090 at 8K. It hit 60 FPS in Deus Ex Mankind Divided and in Crysis 3. I'll show some footage of it doing it in Crysis since this is something of a big deal. I saw 8K being the final barrier, the final can it run Crysis? I used to wonder what kind of future hardware would be required to achieve this seemingly insurmountable challenge in this now 12-year-old game. Well, that hardware is the RTX 5090, with a power consumption of almost 600 watts. It averaged around 60 FPS, maxed out at 8K natively. What a time to be alive! For comparison, the RTX 4090 managed about 45 FPS under the same conditions, or by dropping down to high preset, it scored roughly the same as the 5090 does maxed out. So yes, the RTX 5090 can run Crysis 3 at 8K, unless you want 144Hz, in which case it'll still be unobtainable for quite a while. So in most benchmarks you've seen, the 5090 probably doesn't look like that big a leap over the 4090, yet in terms of pure raster performance and memory bandwidth, it utterly blows the previous generation card out of the water, to the point where there might actually be situations where owners of a 4090 might even consider upgrading to the 5090. Albeit in very niche use cases like VR, or 8K gaming in older titles. It's rather amusing that this is the real advantage of the 5090, despite Nvidia trying to sell the benefits of ray tracing and AI performance so hard instead. Now we get into the world of FrameGen again. Unlike DLSS upscaling, which is obviously a good thing, FrameGen does come with compromises to its input latency, because it's always showing scenes that are a frame or two in the past. As you saw earlier, the amount of latency it adds to the Talos Principle 2 is completely unacceptable. But for some reason, Hogwarts Legacy is a different story. And I'm going to have to film my screen here because Shadowplay doesn't capture the fake frames that FrameGen generates. Yes, it still comes with added latency, but it feels more like mouse smoothing than an actual perceived delay. making it a lot more manageable even when at the same old 30ish base frame rate that the Talos Principle 2 was operating at. Add to this that Hogwarts Legacy is a third-person perspective, and is a much more acceptable way to reach smooth frame rates at 8K. Want a no-compromise experience? Stick to 4K resolution. But the option to play this game at 8K is there, and provided you use DLSS FrameGen and upscaling, it's surprisingly viable. With no upscaling and just 4x FrameGen, it allowed this game to reach upwards of 80 FPS, with subtle but noticeable and regular artifacts around thin, high-contrast things like candles. But just in case you're worried, if we disable FrameGen and only use DLSS performance, we still get about 50 FPS average, which is playable in this sort of game, but I want more. So combine the two and they complement each other nicely. DLSS performance keeps the base frame rate high enough to make FrameGen's artifacts and latency very subtle, while FrameGen ensures the frame rates far exceed 100 FPS at all times, looking very smooth on the monitor. This results in a smooth 8K ray-traced result. Now just think about that for a second. This is 9 times more pixels than a 1440p monitor has. This used to be literally unplayable, unthinkable, even without ray tracing in the equation. Whereas if you decide to enable some DLSS trickery, it's now very much playable. With Cyberpunk 2077, it didn't matter if I was using overdrive ray tracing or just ultra without ray tracing. Natively at 8K it ran sub 30 FPS. Not nice, not acceptable. I needed to enable DLSS ultra performance in this game. And without ray tracing, this ran at about 80 to 90 FPS. A really nice result, and it looked good, but it didn't have ray tracing. So if I enable overdrive ray tracing, together with ultra performance upscaling and frame generation, I could get closer to 120 FPS. Now the frame gen latency in this game is highly variable on the base frame rate. If I used performance upscaling, it was hideous, reminded me a bit of Talos Principle 2, but with ultra performance upscaling, the base frame rate was clearly high enough for it not to feel too laggy anymore. But I still wouldn't want to use frame gen in this game if I was playing it like a first person shooter. So how about that? Cyberpunk in 8K comes with another trade-off. You can have ray tracing and you can have frame gen, provided you play a sneakier character build. Else, you'll have to compromise with the settings elsewhere. Loading up a demanding game like Alan Wake 2 at 8K fills me with a sense of dread, even when equipped with the 5090. I immediately enabled DLSS Ultra Performance upscaling and 4x frame gen, almost as like protection. Then, as I grew more confident with this game, I stripped it off slowly. But not so fast, because having everything on is the way to play Alan Wake 2 at 8K. The frame gen wasn't too laggy, the resulting experience was smooth and playable. In fact, my only issue with it was that even with these new transformer upscaling models, I could still spot artifacts on trees as I ran about. It was subtle, but I could still see it there, which is a shame, since I'm only using a 4K screen. It would be even more noticeable on an 8K one. That being said, when all is still and quiet and I can actually stop to appreciate the scenery, this game does look gorgeous. Apart from on this tent roof here, which the transformer-based DLSS model really didn't like. I increased DLSS to performance mode, making the base resolution 4K, yet this bubbling remained and the base frame rate had dropped far enough for FrameGen to start looking pretty horrible with motion blur enabled, with sharp and distinctive visual bugs plainly visible as I panned about quickly. Disabling motion blur does away with most of this, but there is still some visible fizzing around the character sometimes. If I'm honest, this doesn't bother me anywhere near as much as the input latency does, and both of these things improve as the frame rate does. With FrameGen outputting 100 FPS, there are large, juddery areas where the FrameGen simply doesn't work, and mouse movements feel overly smoothed. When it's outputting about 120, most of the image is FrameGen smoothly, and the input latency has significantly improved. But I would put 150, 160 FPS with FrameGen on as being a good target to aim for, to make both the FrameGen artifacts and the input latency minimal. What's that? A base frame rate of 40 FPS? And I reckon that's doable in this game, provided you turn down some of the ray-traced graphics settings. Of course, I did test this game without FrameGen as well, and with DLSS performance mode I got about 35 FPS average, which I wouldn't want to play this game at. So, the RTX 5090 struggles with native 8K in newer games, even the ones without ray tracing. And those that do have ray tracing definitely require some DLSS trickery to get them playable at this sort of resolution. But that's fine. Rather than looking at the graphics options and deciding which ones you have to sacrifice, you can instead keep the game maxed out and simply enable upscaling and FrameGen instead. Yes, they do come with their own compromises, but they're compromises I'm happier to make in the name of getting a game to look good on an 8K screen. It just requires a bit of common sense. Though if you had that, you wouldn't be gaming at 8K in the first place, would you? Looking back at my 4090 video, I regret only testing it natively. I did have an upscaling video for it in mind, but life got in the way and it never actually happened. So I think it's been good to test native, upscaling and framegen all in one go with this RTX 5090 video that you're watching now. This card isn't the biggest generational leap over the 4090, yet all its improvements shine at 8K, often being the difference between achieving a playable frame rate and not being able to. I was surprised by how much of a difference the extra VRAM made. You look at 24GB as though it's a ridiculous amount of the stuff, and it is, but when you're testing at an equally ridiculous resolution like 8K, then you need all of the VRAM you can eat. So it's cool that the 5090 is a little bit more capable in that regard, although it is ridiculous to say that even 32GB of VRAM doesn't always cut it in 2025. But it's all fun and games for now, isn't it? We can't judge or hate on any of the games or the hardware shown in this video. We're being pioneers, adventurers even. 8K gaming is still a good decade away. We're just testing the waters for now. But one day when 8K is a more viable resolution, people will look back to the distant past, hopefully to this video, and they'll marvel at how the situation and attitudes towards all these relatively new graphical features will have changed. Or not. Thanks again to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Check out the links in this video's description to sign up for free, and if you're playing on PC or consoles and haven't loaded it up within the last 6 months, then you'll get a massive bonus pack too, coming with the exclusive vehicle decorator Eagle of Valor, 100,000 Silver Lions and 7 days of premium free. Sign up quickly, as time for this promotion is limited.